Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Engaging Life Podcast Book Club Edition. This is our third episode, and I'm very, very excited to welcome our guest today because not only is he a reader, he is also a writer, a novelist, which is my biggest aspiration, so I'm in awe of that. Owns a bookstore and is a professor, so if you want to feel like you're, not doing a whole lot in life, meet Ted, because he's doing it all. So, Ted Wheeler, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. So, the first thing that I want to talk about is you being, okay, where should we start here? Let's talk about first, and I did forget one thing, the Omaha Lit Fest.
Oh, right.
So that's another thing that you do. So tell me a little bit about that, because I would assume that people who are tuning into this podcast are mostly readers, because otherwise why would they be watching it? So I would think they might be very interested in what the Omaha Lit Fest is. I didn't even know about it before I started researching you.
Oh, yeah, we haven't done one for 2 years now,
Okay.
or the last one was in the fall of 2021. But novelist and teacher Timothy Shafford actually started it about 15 years ago, and he did 10 versions of it. But then he kind of let it drop for a few years. So my wife, Nicole, and I, because we loved it, just thought we'd try our hand at it. We did one in 2019, which went really well. So we doubled the size of it and made it bigger for 2020, which did not actually happen, of course. But we came back in 2021 and did one. I'd like to do it again. There's nothing on the schedule now to do it. So usually, I guess kind of the tradition of Omaha Lit Fest is when somebody has a good idea for one and, 4 or 5 months of their life where they have more free time to actually put it together, then one happens. But yeah, I'd still love to do one maybe in the next year or so, but we'll see.
Well, keep me updated, because I would love to come to it.
They're a lot of fun.
And promote it too. It just sounds, even the name of it, it's like, ooh, I got to go to that.
Yeah.
So, hopefully we'll have another one coming soon. So, awesome. So, we've got that. And then we've got Dundee Book Company. So, tell me, when did you take it over? Did you start it? Tell me about the history of the bookstore.
So, we had just started it in 2017, which is when my first novel came out. Some of it was just because we were going to be doing a lot of events and we wanted to do different kinds of events, that it would be helpful to have a bookstore that we were running, just because it'd be more flexible, rather than asking other local bookstores to try out all these weird ideas we were having for events. The other part of it is that we've lived in Dundee for 15 years and always thought it would be perfect to have a bookstore. But it was just one of those things where, eventually you either need to stop complaining about the thing or you need to do it yourself. And we just got to the point where we decided we should just do it. When we started, the bookstore was really small, which was part of the idea. My wife, Nicole, was working in startups then. So it was that ethos of when you start a business, it should be the smallest iteration it can possibly be. And then you make it bigger. So we were a mobile bookstore for our first 3 years. We had a book cart made out of rescued barnwood that was designed to fit in the back of our Dodge Journey with 1 inch of space around it in the trunk. And we did that for 3 years, doing, 5 to 7 events a month, setting up in like Blue Barn Theater or the Omaha Community Playhouse. We did a lot of stuff at Page Turner's Lounge, which is just down the block from where we live, and which used to be a bookstore, of course, before it turned into the bar.
Been in there. Every time I go by, I'm like, I gotta go there.
Oh,
Go there.
I like it a lot. It's kind of our neighborhood bar. But they do a lot of cool stuff. They do a lot of free shows, too, because Connor Oberst co-owns the bar. So there's a lot of music going through there as well. Anyway, with Dundee Book Company, in 2020, obviously, we couldn't keep doing it since we were 100% event-based at that time. But in 2021, we noticed that a spot came open in it's a historic house on Underwood Avenue, and they'd always had lawyers' offices or a therapist or something. But it was open, or it was up for lease or open. So we just asked them if we could put retail there and kind of worked out a deal. So for the last 3 years now, we've been in that space, basically a living room of a 100-year-old house. and just, still a tiny bookstore, but quite a bit bigger than a one book cart.
Yeah. I mean, you just love the feel of, walking into Barnes & Noble is kind of soul crushing. That type of big box, walking into a little space like that, it's like you can just kind of feel the love of the people who opened it as well as the people who were in there. I really enjoyed the feel of it.
Well, I appreciate that. And I mean, some of it was like in the pandemic too. So we handmade all the bookshelves and just kind of custom made everything down to even the books. We were just kind of guided by the idea, like, if we didn't want to bring this book home and if we didn't want to own it, then we shouldn't have it in our bookstore. And we're small enough we can make that work. Yeah. But yeah, that is kind of the idea, that it should be curated and personal in that experience.
So if you haven't been to Dundee Book Company, definitely go and become a member too. I became a member, so you get to go to all the events and you get a discount and you get to hear about all the upcoming things going on. So highly recommended. So then moving on to the next thing, you were a journalist for many years. And what made you take the jump to becoming a fiction writer and then to teaching creative writing? How did that, writing's writing. I mean, I'm the same. Fiction is my love, but I own a marketing company. So I write press releases and I write blogs and roofing stuff. And, for my job, they're very different types of writing. So tell me how you made that jump.
Originally, I guess when I went to college, I thought I would go for journalism, but I did not go or study journalism in college, aside from one class. Then just decided it wasn't really for me. So I studied English as an undergrad. But of course, the first job I got out of college then was to work as a journalist, and I did that for 14 years. I think some of why it worked, because I think I still always considered myself a fiction writer first. And I could write well and could do the journalism, well enough to keep moving in that and to keep jobs. So I just kept doing it. But it was also, I don't know, you talk about marketing writing. It's just different sides of the brain, I think, too, which is why it works so well. My company that I worked for that whole time was based in Pasadena. So I worked from home and just had a deadline. And especially when I started, I just had a midnight deadline every day. So it was pretty, it was pretty flexible. And we had just had our first kid, too. So that, freed up where I could spend, the whole morning with the baby. And then my mother-in-law would watch her in the afternoons when I could work on my fiction. And then I would go to the courthouse and do some stuff for work. But then mostly for the reporting, I would just do later at night after dinner. And it was flexible enough to do that, where any other job I had, I wouldn't have had that kind of freedom. So even though I didn't mean to be a journalist, I did like it once I started. And it was just that flexibility. Because I think journalism is not the greatest job in the world. It doesn't pay all that well. The hours are weird often. It can be somewhat, I don't know, just dangerous or different things that go into it. But it was flexible enough, and I did get a lot of satisfaction out of being plugged into everything that was happening.
So the two worlds combined. I know that The War Begins in Paris, it was not your first book, but this one does combine the journalism with the fiction writing. So I have not yet had a chance to read the first books, but I do look forward to going back and reading those. So I recommend you do too. But tell me more about the writing process that happened here, and especially the research process, because so the book is about two women. Miel, am I pronouncing that correctly? I even looked it up, and I was just like, I think it's got to be Miel. I can't think of any other way. I mean, that's her nickname, but Miel and Jane. And so this is obviously, with the name of it, pre-World War II, or coming right up to World War II. And two journalists, one who has started to do basically propaganda for the Nazis, and then this kind of young protege type who's got a Mennonite background. It looks like I'm telling you about what the book is about. You're like, yeah, I know. I should be telling you guys.
Well, you're doing good. So
Mennonite background, and so she's kind of naive and really looks up to this Jane, but then has visions. And she's had a vision since meeting her that she will one day kill her. And then they meet up in Paris, and kind of what happens after that is what the book is about. A small little, I won't give any spoilers away, but if you're interested in historical fiction, definitely pick up this book. So tell me about the research process and then the writing process, because I'm fascinated by all that.
Yeah. It took me a while on this book because it's my fourth book. And from the point that I first discovered Jane Anderson, who was a real person in history, it took me, 8 years to even really start writing the book.
Wow.
But I was also working on my 3 other books during that time. So it was kind of, like I discovered Jane Anderson, this idea of this Georgia debutante, this pioneering female journalist in the 1920s who ended up turning fascist and doing propaganda work from Germany, trying to get the U.S. into the war, but on the other side. So I had that, I guess, that the original idea where I came across that, and it seemed like something that could lead to a book, but I wasn't really sure how to tell the story yet. American fascism wasn't quite the hot topic that it was in 2014, that it would become in 2017, especially with the March of the Right in Charlottesville, Virginia, which was a big thing that kind of told me that I should write this book and to get into it more. So I just kind of held on to that and waited. My third book, my second novel, came out in the spring of 2020. But that same spring, I also won a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship to write this book. So that was a lot of it where maybe just gave me the confidence to get into it. My first novel was historical fiction, but I wasn't really sure if I wanted to get back into it just because it is so much research.
How does an endowment work? Do they basically just front you money and say, go write this book?
More or less, yeah.
Okay.
So they have different... their one thing is that it should support your writing career in whatever way you think is best. So I know some people have won it, like they bought groceries for a year, they paid rent because that allowed them to write.
Do you apply for it?
You have to apply for it.
Okay.
So it was kind of like shocking in a good way when I won it, because I think it's usually around 800 or 900 people apply for it every year, but you have to be a published author already to even send in the application.
Okay.
And then usually around 25 writers win it. They alternate between prose and poetry every year. Okay. And then it's $25,000. Nice. So I was going to use it to spend that summer in Europe researching and writing as much as the book as I could, which I got 5 days in Paris in March of 2020. I was actually on the last United flight back overseas from Paris before the world shut down. And it was a big heartbreak, I think, in that moment. And I also had that new novel out that I never really got to promote or tour or share that much. So I didn't really start writing the book maybe till even that fall. Okay. But I was still doing research and reading, mostly memoirs of writers who were working at that time, some of them who make cameos in the novel, but just kind of building up like who these people would be, and especially Miel, this character, trying to figure out what would actually get her in this position where the book could take off and run. And her being Mennonite, which I was not raised Mennonite, so I had to figure out what that too. Yeah. Mostly I just wanted a character who was, believed or was a pacifist radically to their core. So that was kind of how it led her to being Mennonite. And it's like, and it worked. Yeah. And her being from Iowa, me being from Iowa, being a Midwesterner, made me feel a lot better about writing a book that's set in Paris and not being, feeling like an imposter, that I didn't know how to do things or what would happen just because she wouldn't know either.
Yep, very good. And did you ever get to go, did you go back?
Yeah, so I've been back to Paris twice since then, and another trip to Germany, which the second half of the novel takes place in Germany. So I was able to go back and do some research there, which was a little different because the book was pretty much written by that point. Okay. But it was, at least I could fact check a little bit more. And like my last real read through before it went off to my editor, I did when I was in Germany. So it was nice to be able to have that and I don't know, to spend some of that money I won too.
Yeah, absolutely. So did you have an agent at the time? I mean, you had obviously 3 books published, so I assume you had an agent in a publishing house and all of that. Prior to winning the endowment, that was just kind of top of it?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So I've had the same... My first book was a collection of short fiction, and that was with a small press, but all 3 of my novels have been with the same agent And I've actually had the same editor for all three too. Like she changed houses because she worked with Little A for the first two books, but she's a senior editor at Little Brown now, which is a good step up.
Absolutely.
And then luckily, I don't know, I just followed her there and didn't overthink it too much.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, definitely read this. And you can get it at Dundee Book Company as well. So let's move on to our actual book club book that you selected, The Vulnerables, by, is it Sigrid?
I'm not really sure, actually. I would say
Nunez would be my guess, but I didn't look it up. But so tell me why you chose this book. Have you read other books by her, or did it just look interesting, or what was your...
I've read some of her short fiction before, and I actually did an interview with her where I interviewed her back when I worked for Prairie Schooner Lit Mag, which is out of Lincoln, Nebraska. So I knew who she was, and she was just so gracious and so nice when I interviewed her, and I really liked her short fiction then. But she had won National Book Award. Yeah,
I read that one
for The Friend. Oh, okay. Yeah. See, I haven't read that one yet, but is it good?
It is. I mean, it's very similar. Not similar to in style is very similar, and in obviously her writing style is going to be similar. But then that one's about a dog,
right?
This one's about a parrot, kind of.
Yeah,
kind of. So it kind of intrigued me because it was like, is this a theme in all of her books, that there's an animal, that the character bonds with, or was it just a it just so happened that the two I read.
Yeah, which I've heard, or she has her own genre, like pet-focused fiction. But I don't know that she's done that before The Friend. But she won the National Book Award, so you might as well keep it going. The main reason I picked this book is because it's set in the pandemic. And it's a question I get a lot as a writer. Yes. Like, do I think there will be more novels set in the pandemic, and are people writing about the pandemic? And I usually say no, that I don't think there really will be that many, mostly for the reason, just thinking that I think most people want to forget it and just kind of move past it. And my first novel was set in Omaha during the World War I era, but also with the Spanish flu was the same time. But I'd found that it was really hard to find much information about the Spanish flu, or at least much fiction and stories that were told about it. Like there was scientific information and kind of sociology, but it didn't seem like people really wrote about it.
Probably for the same reason you're saying. Yeah. I don't even want to remember that.
Right, yeah.
It was probably, obviously it was very traumatic. They lost loved ones, the same thing, only on a broader scale.
Yeah.
So I can see that.
And it was, but we had the Roaring 20s after that too, where people, you got the parties that came after, which I don't think is really, it doesn't seem like we really have the Roaring 20s of our own right now.
Right, yeah.
At least not in the same way. Anyway, that was kind of the idea that, this novelist who's really decorated, who I've liked her writing before, and at least she wrote a pandemic novel that talks about it. So I was interested to see if it worked. If she could pull it off and what that meant.
This is actually the second one that I've read within a month that was pandemic related. The other one was The Sentence by Louise Erdrich.
Yeah.
That one was, but it kind of veered. Like it started off as one thing, and then the pandemic hit, and and I was like, okay, which made me think she was probably writing it during the pandemic, and but it worked for the most part, but. Yeah, I was wondering that too. It's like, how many of these are going to start coming out? Because you would think with when the pandemic was and how long it takes to get a book written and out, now would be the time that we'll be seeing them, which is what I've noticed. I mean, it's only the second one that I've read that's had that, but
yeah, but it should, the timeline should line up. And this one definitely, I kind of question, like a lot of times it doesn't really seem like fiction. And she talks about that at the end of the book, or just that we need new kinds of novels. But a lot of it does just seem like a pandemic diary, and it's very philosophical, and just these kind of tangents that go off that makes sense if you're like stuck at home with yourself for a week.
Yes.
But in like non-pandemic time, they seem beside the point.
Yeah. So the book is pretty. There isn't a real plot to it. It's a writer, which. I took it to be a semi-autobiographical, and she talks about that in the book of combining the two genres, and I feel like that's what she did because it's an unnamed narrator, but she kind of, you know, okay, let me back up. So she's an older writer. I would assume in her 60s is kind of what it seems like. And the pandemic hits, everybody leaves town. She's in Manhattan alone, and her friend asks her to go take care of her parrot. And so she develops this relationship with the parrot, and then a kid,
right.
who, I mean, he's probably 24.
Yeah, they said he was in his last year of college.
Yeah.
So whatever that means exactly.
Yeah. He comes back and she's living in the house. He comes back because he was supposed to take care of the parrot. And so kind of that dynamic there. But she says once that he keeps forgetting her name. And then that he says the wrong first part of her name. Her name's Sigrid, so I assume he called her Ingrid.
Yeah.
And then there's one other thing where she talks about, like, she was writing her name and the autocorrect changed it to like something noun, or, you know, so it's like, oh, it's her.
Yeah.
I mean, it's subtle.
It seems like she was trying to tell us that.
Yeah.
In that moment.
Yeah. So that's pretty much what the story's about. I really enjoyed being a writer and being a reader. There's so many references to authors and to things that they said. And I want to read because it's funny, because it's been two books now. The other one is not the sentence. It's a different one I'll talk about in a moment, that have introduced this concept, I guess. And I find it really, really interesting. So this is the very first paragraph of the book, which is my favorite of the whole book. So it starts with, "It was an uncertain spring. I had read the book a long time ago, and except for this sentence, I remembered almost nothing about it. I could not have told you about the people who appeared in the book or what happened to them. I could not have told you until later, after I looked it up, that the book began in the year 1880. Not that it mattered. Only when I was young did I believe that it was important to remember what happened in every novel I read. Now I know the truth. What matters is what you experience while reading, the states of feeling that the story evokes, the questions that rise in your mind rather than the fictional events described."
Yeah.
I love that, because sometimes I read a lot and I go back, I'm like, I can't even remember what that book was about. And I feel, I'm like, am I doing it wrong? Am I reading too fast? Yeah. And so I love that concept of, it's not really about remembering the events in the book. It's about, how did it make you feel? How did it make your mind grow? How did it change you as a person? What things did it bring up for you? So I love that. And then the last book I read, I'm all over the board with genres. The Guncle. I don't know if you've seen it.
No.
It's another Stephen Rowley.
Okay.
And it's about a gay guy who raises, for the summer, it's his brother's kids, but it was also his best friend married his brother, and she died. And so he takes the kids for the summer, and they call him the Guncle, or Gup, the gay uncle. I think his name's Peter. But anyway, he has a little thing in there where he gets rid of a lot of his books because he says a book should be an experience, not a trophy that you show that you read it. And I was like, oh, that's kind of the same. Yeah. Because I've done that too. I used to keep all my books, and I really pared it down. I only keep the ones that I either want to lend or that I want to read again. And so I love that. It's just, a book should be an experience, not a trophy. Yeah. So I thought that was interesting. But so I really loved all the references to reading and to writing. And the book for me worked on one level. I read it in one sitting.
Oh, wow.
I think it was 4 hours is about what I put into it. It's, it's a shortish book. So I took it all in at one time. And there was never a point where I wanted to quit, but there wasn't really a storyline. There wasn't really a plot. So it wasn't really a novel, but it kept me interested, and I had a lot of aha, or, ooh, I want to underline that sort of moment. So I would say, on the whole, I enjoyed the book. What did you think of it?
I mean, pretty similar, really, where I think I like it, but it's hard to pin down why exactly, besides that Sigrid Nunez seems very, very smart and very entertaining to read. This reminded me a lot of Anne Lamott. I teach Bird by Bird. That's one of my favorite pretty books. Often. Yeah. But it was that kind of just like folksy wisdom combined with a lot of advice about writing. Yes. And a little bit of plot in both of them, like you can connect the dots and you feel like, this is somebody's life. Yes. But like the story itself doesn't really seem to matter as much as the I guess the experience maybe of
Yeah.
writing it too, or
Yeah.
these like little bits that fall into it.
Absolutely. And I think it's funny that it's a book, with writing advice, but her in the book can't write.
Right. Yeah.
She's experiencing writer's block, or,
Mhm.
it's during COVID, a lot of us had a lot of, trouble sticking to work, and she was completely alone. And so
Yeah,
it's
she had the,
interesting. It's like she was kind of giving herself advice
yeah.
in the book.
That's what it seemed like.
Yeah.
Or she was like searching for something for sure, and probably
Yeah.
reading a lot. I love that line where she was talking about like the experience during the pandemic of being a non-essential worker. Where
Yes.
like I know my brother like never took off work. He works in fire truck factories doing
Okay.
testing and stuff. So like I don't know, he basically didn't get a day off like throughout the whole pandemic. But it was a really interesting, that idea of like, is my work not essential?
Yeah.
And if it's not, why do I have to do it all the time? Or
Yeah.
like what drives you to do it? And which I connected to being a writer too, because it's
Mhm.
I think one of the big struggles all the time is just like, well, if nobody's going to read this, or
Why am I doing it?
yeah,
Mhm.
and because it's so hard to do, like emotionally,
Mhm.
it takes up so much of your time, can strain your relationships.
Absolutely. And
it's like,
very
what's the-
likely, for the most part, even if it's popular, it's probably not going to make you
Right.
rich.
Exactly,
you
yeah.
know? Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's, being a writer myself, you have to do it for the love of writing
Hmm.
and kind of make it its own reward. And it's something I've struggled with. It's like I have to tell myself in my head, I will continue to write till the day I die, even if nothing ever gets published, because I love it.
Hmm.
And it's who I am. And you keep coming back to it. And I think that's probably how most writers are. There's like,
Yeah.
I can't not do it.
I think so. Like even with 4 books out, like usually when I finish one, I was like, well, I'm not going to write anything for 5 years or something.
Mhm.
But then you get an idea, or I do anyway, and it's just like, well, I can do something with this, and I kind of see it. But when you're working on a project, like you don't really think, or at least I don't, about the end product that much, and it's just more about wanting to see what happens in the story, and wanting to finish this thing that I've started
Yeah.
in the best way I can do it, which I don't know. And like I said, like a lot of times I wish I wasn't that way, that I could just put it off and say like, no, I'm not going to write this book. It's not for me. Like I should just take the next 5 years being more of a normal person.
Mhm.
But once once it kind of hooks you as a writer, it's hard to walk
Yeah.
away from.
And once the story's in your head,
Yeah.
it's like it has to be told.
Yeah.
It
And
has
it
to
feels
be
so
told.
special that like you're the person who has this idea.
Yes.
Like nobody else can write that book.
Yes.
So like, I don't know, like a, not necessarily like duty or obligation
Well,
or
kinda,
like destiny,
yeah.
but maybe something
Yeah.
mixed up in there.
Have you read Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert?
I haven't.
So it's a, I think I've listened to it twice, and it's almost a real ethereal, that writing is a type of magic.
Mhm.
And it's funny when you bring up that I'm the only person who can write this story. She tells a story of how she had this idea for a book, and I'm going to get the details wrong, but basically of a woman who goes over to South America to help discover a vaccine or something, and what happens to her there. And this was her idea. And for whatever reason, it kept getting put off, and she couldn't do it. And one of her good friends is Anne Patchett.
Yeah.
And she had never, ever spoken to her about this idea at all. And Anne Patchett ended up writing State of Wonder, which is about
Oh.
a woman who goes to Brazil to discover a vaccine. And,
Oh, that's
and so
funny.
Elizabeth Gilbert was like, the ideas are out there. They're not, and if you don't grab it,
Yeah.
another writer will.
Mhm.
And I loved that I love thinking of writing as magic like that. It's like, even if it's not true, I'm into a lot of tarot and stuff, like
Mhm.
that. And my husband's he's a financial planner, if that tells you anything. He's always just like, do you really think this is true? And I'm like, I don't know, but it makes my life more fun.
Yeah.
And if that's all it is, that's well worth it.
Yeah.
It makes my life more interesting and more fun. Is it really true? Do you ever really know if anything's really true? I mean,
Right. That's what.
honestly. But
Yeah.
but if that makes your life more interesting, and if the stuff that she was talking about in Big Magic, if that makes you love writing more, why not believe it?
Right. Which I think Nunez talks about quite a bit in the book too, or this idea, I don't know, maybe about like struggling about why she should write fiction and why she should be a novelist, besides the fact that she feels like she's a novelist.
Yeah.
And that's just what she's always done. But towards the end, there was that line, I forget, or Charles Fraser, who's a famous novelist.
Pullman?
Right, yeah. But he doesn't read fiction, apparently. Like, he doesn't read other people's novels.
Yeah.
He only writes them. But he said he could never get past the idea that, like, when somebody says something happens in a novel, like, he just thinks, no, it didn't.
Yeah.
Like, no, it didn't.
Yeah. Which is funny, because then he writes.
Yeah.
Which normally, I mean, it's hard to be a novelist if you don't read novels, but.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised by that.
He was able to.
But it did make me think, because like, I read almost no nonfiction unless it's for research.
Mm-hmm.
And even when researching a book, I read almost, more than half. I just read other novels that are either from that time period or talking about that time period. And it's just kind of the tradition and the storytelling that I'm drawn to.
Yeah.
But I don't think I've ever had a moment like that where, like, even it's like, I know it's not true. Like, but it just, like, it has never mattered to me, I guess.
Their own way.
Right.
It's human nature is true. It's, does it really matter that the events didn't happen? But, and I think it's going to sound weird, odd for a guy, because guys mostly fall on that. My husband's that way. He's just like, what are you reading? Oh, a not true book?
Yeah.
It holds no interest for him.
Right.
It didn't happen. There's no facts involved. And I think, too, it's the different parts of the brain. Because the way I process information is I have to see it as a single person's story. So, like, if I think about slavery or if I think about the Holocaust, well, they sound terrible, but I can't really get into being, very passionate about it because it's just kind of a concept. Right. But if I read a novel from one person's perspective and what that looked like and what it felt like and what it, now I'm like, oh my God, that was, and he's the opposite. He needs the facts and the straight, and then he can conceptualize it. So just different types of brains.
Yeah, but I think it is that idea of immediacy, maybe, because I mean, I do read a lot of news, so in that kind of way, it's different. But the way you read news, and I think a lot of nonfiction, it's just set up so that you can read the first part of it, and you don't really have to read the end, or you can skip around and you still get, most of the facts to shape how you think about something. But fiction, I think, is so immediate and exciting because it doesn't work that way. Where like at least for me, like I can never skip a paragraph, I can never skip a page.
Yeah, you might miss something.
Yeah, and like something like small and nuanced that makes a huge difference in the story and in your understanding of that person. But I think for me, at least, like that's the big difference where I like that experience that like I have to pay attention and get involved in like that game with a writer where they're trying to give you enough to make you care about this person who doesn't exist. And do they pull it off rather than just kind of, I don't know, gathering facts. And it could be that, being a reporter for so long, like I did a lot of fact gathering and like know how that works too. So I needed something else to feed me.
Absolutely. So I think the other theme that I saw in it, and I would assume this is something this writer is struggling with, was aging. Mm-hmm. She's trapped in this house with a young, good-looking college student and knows that nothing can happen between them because she's a 60-plus-year-old woman, and her friend is talking her through it. It's like, does this make you feel bad that this time for you is past? Nothing can happen here. Are you regretting? Not regretting. I mean, you can't really regret aging, I guess, but are you struggling?
Or lamenting.
With that, with that concept. So that makes me wonder if she, it almost seems like because I'll do this sometimes when I'm struggling with something, I'll just start writing in a journal. And it's like, as I'm writing, I'll be like, oh my goodness, I didn't realize that I really felt that way. Or that, oh, wow, yes, that's what it is. Right. So it almost seems like a way of processing her own feelings.
Yeah. I think it's a lot of it because there is, especially in the first part of the book where they have that long chapter about the friend and her nymphomaniac mother, and which never really comes back to it. But I think it sets up this idea later, like that was, and the friend dies too. So it's definitely in her past, but it's kind of in all of their past too, with her friends. But that later detail when she finally does start talking with the younger man, which is it, Vetch or something was
Vetch, she gives
very
him
odd
a name.
pseudonym.
She says his name starts with V.
Oh, but it's not the one you'd think or something like that. Yeah.
But I'm going to call him Vetch. Yeah, which is.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But she mentions that she keeps having to stop herself from showing him pictures of her when she was the same age, when she was in college, just so that he knows that like she was hot too.
Yeah.
Like,
I didn't always look like this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she's like, she doesn't do it. Like she restrains herself. But it was, I don't know, I thought that was such a perfect detail and a little anecdote that explained her situation and her desire. But also just to be recognized, I guess, to be seen as, I don't know, because she's
valuable. And
she's,
yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. And so you said the thing about the mother getting, there were so many little storylines that you thought were going to come back that didn't. I mean, even the parrot kind of got dropped.
Yeah.
You know, she was like Bond.
I thought it'd be a lot more.
And then it was just kind of like, then
it's on the cover.
And it kind of wasn't even about the parrot anymore. But that, you know, goes with the theme of this was kind of not really a stream of consciousness, but it's kind of what she was going through. And that's how life is. You know, we want it to be like a novel where there's a beginning and a middle and an end, but pretty much it's all I think this is that didn't turn out to be anything. Maybe that didn't turn out to be anything. It's kind of how life is, which, you know, for a novel, I think, you know, for listeners or viewers, I would say read this book if you love. It was very well written. There were some very profound insights. It really made you think about things if you read it carefully. But don't read it if you like plot-driven novels, because you won't like it.
Yeah, and I think it is. I mean, somewhat of the nature of the pandemic too. That like we just didn't get full storylines, or I don't know. We didn't have a lot of plot in our individual lives, even if there was a lot of drama playing out above our heads all the time. But I did like, I don't know, just her voice. I think it was because I read it over maybe a week or so, I read it very slowly. But it was kind of nice just to come back to it and hear this like very intelligent, very well considered woman think about things. Friend. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's very intimate in that kind of way. So I enjoyed it quite a bit. But it was, if you want a like page turner plot based book, not so much.
Yeah. Well, that was what we both thought of The Vulnerables. So I do encourage you to read it again for the reasons I said before. This one does have a plot as well as very good writing. So if you like historical fiction with a plot, check this one out. And I want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I think this has been a great discussion and I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too.
So I will put more information in the show notes about Dundee Book Company and about Ted's books so that you can check them out for yourself. But for now, I want to say thank you for joining us and we look forward to talking to you on the next podcast.